Hello and welcome to another episode of Geopolitical Cousins. I'm the other Jacob. Jacob and Marko are providing a special episode today because they were off the air for 2 weeks. They are doing top 5 geopolitical presidents and bottom 5 geopolitical presidents
of the United States of America.
If you like the episode, please give us a rating and a review. Send it to everybody that you know, and stay safe out there. It is wild.
All right, listeners, we're back 2 times in 1 week. This is a special treat. We hope you enjoy it. Marko, it's been what, 3 days, 2 days? It's good to see you.
No, it's been a very short period of time, but what's funny is that when both of us posted on X that we were going to drop the episode on Tuesday or Wednesday, the reaction was like, about fucking time. I was like, okay, guys, we're sorry, we're trying our best, and as a compensation for being off air for 2 weeks, here it is, 2 multi-hour episodes in 1 week.
Yeah, how quickly people get entitled to free content being delivered on a schedule that they think is absolutely critical for them. As soon as you guys blow up our number, I mean, it doesn't even have to be to Joe Rogan levels. Like, we'll take like 1/10 of Joe Rogan levels, and then we can give you all the content that you possibly want. So this is all on you. The more you spread the gospel, the better we will be. We're going to do mostly a gimmicky episode because somebody on X reached out to us, and I'm sorry to that person. I was going to shout you out, but I have since lost your actual handle. So you can get mad at me and send us something, and I'll make sure that we shout you out in the second one. But before we get there, Marko, I have 2 funny things to lead in with, because I wouldn't be a good MC if I didn't have funny things. I don't know if you saw. Did you see that Syria's interior ministry is now recruiting women into the ranks of its public internal security and police forces?
Interesting.
I did not have jihadists embracing feminism on my 2025 bingo card. And then I also thought was interesting that Comrade Mamdani doesn't want you to shop at Starbucks anymore. Any of you listening, Starbucks workers are on strike. Their union is on strike right now, and Comrade Mamdani is urging us not to patronize Starbucks while the Starbucks workers are on strike. And I put this on X, but I just want to put it to you here, Marko, because I have not yet done a coffee rant on Geopolitical Cousins. I have saved those rants mostly for my podcast. But we should be boycotting Starbucks anyway, because it's absolutely revolting and disgusting. I cannot believe that anybody drinks this swill. And if I actually followed through on some of my calls with investments, I'd be shorting Starbucks, and I'd be in the poorhouse, because I would be wrong, because Americans just gobble up these stupid drinks anymore. So anyway, you don't need Comrade Mamdani to tell you not to go to Starbucks. Just listen to me and my evaluation of its shitty coffee to boycott it there. That's my Larry David rant to start.
Jacob Shapiro is a coffee snob. Who would have known?
Who would have guessed? Is there anything that I've said so far that would make you think that I would be a snob when it comes to this part?
Not a Folgers guy? Not a Folgers guy, huh?
No, Folgers is fine. Like, I love a good cup of pretty normal coffee, or even instant coffee. Like, it makes me think of my graduate school days. What I cannot stand is Starbucks charging lots of money for coffee that is even worse than Folgers. It's just reprehensible, because they don't actually focus on the coffee. They're focusing on the frappuccinos and the sugary drinks and things like that. But if you actually go to Starbucks and ask them for an espresso, first of all, they'll be like, I don't know which button to hit on the machine because I don't know how to do that. And second of all, it will like literally turn your stomach. It's revolting, because if you don't have all the shit that goes along with it, it's just and the other part of this, Marko, is that, you and I are both on the road a lot and speaking at events, and there's a special level of awful for that Starbucks coffee, because the hotel only has Starbucks coffee, and it's not even being made for your cup. It's being made in those huge, I don't even know what those drink dispensers are, but you go and those huge vats, and they're just like congealing there for hours and being heated over time, so it tastes even more bitter and burnt than it should before. No, I have no problem with Folgers. Like, that's perfectly fine.
Can I make a plug for a coffee?
Please.
So my favorite coffee, and the coffee I'm enjoying right now, is New Mexico Pinon coffee.
Very nice. That sounds nice.
I really, really enjoy it. And it's awesome. It comes in these red bags. I buy it whole beans, put it in, and all of my geopolitical analysis runs on the New Mexico Pinon coffee. So there you go. And I have not been paid to say that. which is too bad. New Mexico Pinon Coffee, I will totally take your free beans. So yes. By the way, al-Shara, our Syrian president, first of all, he was filmed taking a jump shot that was questionable. As somebody
I
who
didn't see that.
considers myself a commentator of both basketball and geopolitics, we ranked him very high on the list. Well, I ranked him extremely high. I think he was in my top 5 or top 10.
He was.
He is proving to be quite competent. His visit to Washington, D.C. is a big notch in a feather in my hat for picking him so high. He did really well, but he was a little bit disappointing. He played basketball with some U.S. soldiers, I think at the White House or somewhere there, and his jump shot was just trash. But, the man was busy for the last 20 years. We all understand that, so we can give him a pass of that.
Has anyone seen Kim Jong-un's jump shot? Do we know if he can actually shoot the ball?
Well, I played basketball with his brother.
Ah, okay. Tell us more.
So I went to a high school in Switzerland, the International School of Bern. And this is documented. Kim Jong-un's older brother by 3 years, I think, or maybe 2 years, went to my high school. Now, at the time, none of us kids knew that he was actually Kim Jong-un's brother. We were told that there were these 2 North Korean kids whose father was the cook at the Swiss embassy, at the embassy to Switzerland, which, even to me at 17 was like, really? Like, North Korea pays for the children of the cook to go to an international school in Bern, Switzerland, whose fees are 23,000 Swiss francs a year? But anyways, so there was this kid. He was in the grade below me. I think his name was Kwang Chol, which was not the real name. And he was terrible. And he tried out for the basketball team. I set a pick for him, and he fell and was very sad. And I just remember that. But he was a really nice kid, really nice guy. Didn't really speak English that great. But no, he did not have game. Now, there was another North Korean kid who was his friend or his brother. Like, the story didn't really make sense, but he was amazing. He was amazing. He was fit. He was not too tall, but like really athletic. He was in the starting team. I was in 10th grade, so I was a bench warmer in 10th grade. I didn't really play much, but this kid was a starter, and he was amazing. He was an 11th grader, I think. Later on, I was told that was a 27-year-old bodyguard for... And so, yes, International School of Bern, the Bears, which was our mascot, we played at all the tournaments with a 27-year-old adult. So I could go off on this story further, but I'm going to stop here because we have a podcast to record. We can do a piecemeal.
We do.
This is a true story, by the way. I'm not making this stuff up. This is true.
That's what people come here to listen to my coffee takes and to your war stories about setting a pick on the brother of the supreme leader and living to tell the tale, at least for now.
By the way, so he was supposed to be the next dictator of North Korea. And then on his deathbed, Kim Jong-il decided to shift to Kim Jong-un. And what we have heard from insiders who have since then written books and stuff is that Kim Jong, the guy that I went to high school with, was just not up to it. His father felt he was too nice, and I can attest to that. He was a great kid, had many conversations about basketball with him. And I remember this one time he came from France from the summer, and he was like, "Hey, Marko, you love basketball?" I was like, "Yes, I love basketball." He's like, "I just got Michael Jordan's shoes." And I was like, "Come on, man. Really? Bro, you don't have to say that. That seems unlikely." And he's like, No. The McDonald's tournament, the best American NBA champion plays the European. I was like, "Yeah." He was like, "Yeah, I was in Paris at this tournament, and then I went to the locker room, and Michael Jordan gave me his shoes." And at the time, I was like, cool, walked away. It was like, come on, bro. And now I'm like, holy crap, Michael Jordan gave him shoes. That's actually realistic now in retrospect. Okay, anyways, back to the podcast.
Back to that. We hope you all enjoyed that trip down memory lane with the two of us. So because we recorded so recently this week, and because it's been a while since we did one of our gimmick episodes, I thought we would dive into a gimmick that was suggested by somebody on X whose handle, as I said, I've forgotten. So the suggestion was to do top 5 geopolitical U.S. presidents and then bottom 5 geopolitical presidents. Marko, should we start with the top 5 or the bottom 5?
So I think that what we should do here is think of this as starting 5, and then starting 5 of incompetence and starting 5. So I don't know if we should do a draft pick, Jacob, just because you and I shouldn't be that misaligned.
No, we should. It was actually interesting to look around it because some people have done these lists. There's actually a list that the Presidential Historian Survey has a category for international relations. You can find it on C-SPAN's website, and they have rankings that are picked by lots of different professors and interviews with folks who study the presidency for a living. And I'm actually curious, like how much our list will align with their list, and if we have any big breaks. But no, so we don't have to do a draft. Do you want to maybe start with your starting 5 for competent presidents? All right,
yeah,
let's do
I think so too. And I think the incompetent ones will be more interesting. And by the way, I think you should throw the link to that C-SPAN into the description, and then also refer to it throughout their conversation, just so we have. By the way, I did find a guy who recommended this. He only has 87 followers, so let's help him out. His handle is at Fejesa, Fejesa. I'm just going to assume the J is pronounced Y. He is from Budapest, Hungary, and goes by the name Andras. So Andras, thank you, buddy. Great suggestion. So let's get right into it. Okay, so my starting 5. I've got a lot of bench players. I've got like a 12-man roster here.
Yeah. I've got a lot of honorable mentions. I should say, well, before we start, just the only rule that I had for myself, I don't know if you had a similar rule, was I did not consider Donald Trump because he's still in the office and I think the jury's out. I don't think you can appropriately place him on the list. So he will not be making any appearance in my comments, but it's just because I don't think you can judge Trump so far because he's still in the office.
I agree with that. I had that too. I think that I will just say I think tactically he would make my starting 5. I think his tactical moves are brilliant from a foreign policy perspective. Strategically and secularly, however, I think it's going to be very difficult to judge him because undermining American alliances could have very, very detrimental impact in the long term. So yes, my old test, my litmus test is who would you want to go with you to negotiate with a used car salesman? Would you want to bring Kamala Harris, Joe Biden, or Donald Trump? And anyone who says anything other than Donald Trump should just stop listening to our podcast because you are hopelessly ideological. It is just a fact that you would definitely bring Donald J. Trump with you to negotiate a lower price on your car, on your used car against the used car salesman. And that is what tactics of foreign policy and diplomacy are about. It's like, can you be an asshole when it is required to be an asshole? Can you look past norms and values and morals when it requires to do that? So I do think that tactically speaking, he would probably make my starting 5, but the jury is out, as you say. And I think occasionally he has done things, let's just be very clear here, out of petty reasons. The Iran nuclear negotiations, that treaty was working, that Barack Obama signed, and he kind of undermined it just because, well, Barack Obama signed it. Now we're going to probably renegotiate another deal that's going to look exactly the same. It's not going to.
Yeah, but it's going to be called the Trump nuclear deal, Marko. So it's going to be so much better.
So it's going to be so much better. All right, so let me do my starting 5. I don't think there's going to be that much a dispute between the two of us. My starting 5: FDR, James Polk, George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, even though it wasn't really foreign policy, but whatevs. And then George H.W. Bush. So the father, not the son. And then, of course, on the bench, we've got just like 80 people, but I'll just list them off because I'm sure. Well, actually, no. Let me not list off the bench. Let me let you do the starters, and then when we compare, maybe that's better. Let's. So that's my starting 5 is FDR, James Polk, George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, and George H.W. Bush.
Yeah, we have more disagreement than I would have thought.
That's awesome.
Is your starting five, is that ranked in terms of like, is number one FDR, number two Polk, or are you just sort of throwing in, these are like the five, these are the five for different reasons?
I think mildly yes. Mildly yes. I think George Washington should be second. So FDR first, George Washington second, James Polk third, Abraham Lincoln four, and H.W. Bush fifth. And then I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 guys on the bench. So it's a 13-man roster. So like obviously a lot of your guys will be on the bench. But yes, I'm looking forward to the debate.
Interesting. Okay. Well, I had my guys 1 through 5. So these are ranked. So this can be my starting five. Number one for me is Abraham Lincoln. And maybe we spend a little bit of time on him because he wasn't, I mean, obviously he was president during the Civil War, and we can have an interesting semantic debate about whether the Confederacy at this point is a foreign state and whether the Civil War is about engagement with a foreign state. But I think far more important for him is are things like the Trent Affair, where you get a diplomatic crisis with the UK because a Union warship intercepts a British mail ship and seizes 2 Confederate envoys. And the Union is out for blood. Like the Union doesn't want him to give up. They're ready to fight everyone. And Lincoln's line on this was one war at a time. And he recognizes the need that he can't pick a fight with the South and with Britain, and basically says, okay, Britain, whatever you want. And he releases the prisoners despite the domestic pressure, expresses formal regret, apologizes, tells Britain that he wants them to remain neutral, everything else. If Britain comes in on the side of the Confederacy, it's an entirely different war. That was entirely what Lee was trying to get accomplished. He wanted to show enough strength so that the British would come in and support the Confederacy. So anyway, we can go down that route. I think he deserves a lot of credit for how he managed foreign policy. Well,
what I would say to you is that that comes up in a lot of history. The presidents that are considered the best foreign policy presidents quite often were those that were able to tone down the passions domestically. So I agree with you that's a very, especially in that early 150 years of American existence when it was just a rising power. It wasn't yet hegemon. So nice.
Yeah, and this is also why George Washington, for me, is number two. When you think about the degree of difficulty of his position and all the things that he had to do, I mean, it's just really remarkable. I mean, he is the founding leader of the United States, and yet he is the one who goes for the Jay Treaty, normalizes ties with Britain, even though he just, fought a conflict with Britain. And he does this because he doesn't want a second Anglo-American war. He's willing to, stabilize the U.S. economy, even if his critics saw it as pro-British. And we also, I mean, he had a bunch of other things too. He had a treaty with Spain that allowed free navigation of the Mississippi and used the Jay Treaty to get Spain to give him, greater concessions. He told the French, when somebody was trying to send, or I forget what the name of the guy was, Edmond something or other, but he was supposed to come to the U.S. and spur up support for the French Revolution. And Washington was like, no, I don't care what the French did for us during the Revolution. Like, we're not supporting France right now. And his whole thing about neutrality. So I think he's there. I don't have, though, I mean, Polk is in my honorable mention. And George H.W. Bush is also in my honorable mention, but they are not in my starting five. I'll round out my starting five. FDR number 3, Teddy number 4, and then I really struggled at number 5 with 2 excellent foreign policy presidents who also committed major blunders. But the strengths of their decisions, I think, maybe outweighed their blunders. And that was, I was wrestling with Thomas Jefferson and Ronald Reagan, because both of them do things that are immensely important. Like Thomas Jefferson is the reason for the Louisiana Purchase. And the Louisiana Purchase is such a big deal in the history of the United States. And I don't really think it happens without him. And there's sort of 3 levels at that. Number one, he was the one who was thinking about it more so than any other US politician at the time. He didn't even think that it was possible to get the Louisiana Purchase, but he sends James Monroe to France to join one of his other negotiators that's already there, and gives them enough freedom and power to make the deal if they can make the deal. And then when it looks like it's actually going to happen, Jefferson, who himself was a strict constitutionalist, and this is coming from a guy who wrote large sections of it, basically was like, yeah, it doesn't matter that this is technically illegal. We need to do the Louisiana Purchase. We need to do it yesterday. This is so critical for the U.S. You can throw up just a couple of years later, he commits a terrible blunder when he tries to, get cutesy with the UK and France, and leads to a massive economic crisis and all sorts of other things that don't do particularly well. When I asked
Well,
ChatGPT
probably.
about this, they no, go ahead.
Well, probably because he was a French spy. But go on.
I don't know. When I was asking ChatGPT about this, it I guess it knows what I've been asking it lately, because it was like, yeah, Thomas Jefferson, the James Harden of U.S. foreign policy, historic highs, baffling lows, undeniable overall impact. I was like, I feel like that's not so kind to Thomas
It
Jefferson.
is not kind
Um,
at all. But
no, not
I think the Louisiana Purchase. I think there is I had a hesitancy because I felt like I was overstating those who acquired territory, and that's very like imperialistic of me. Um, John Adams, by the way, since we're in this sort of period, I also thought of John Adams actually because he navigated a very complicated period of time during the Napoleonic Wars. I mean, you referred to the Jay Treaty by Washington, but John Adams had to do a lot of different things. XYZ affair. There was a huge, huge anti-French sentiment in the United States during the Napoleonic Wars, and you know, uh, basically, and there was a sense that the French interfered in American elections, trying to get Jefferson elected. And John Adams managed to navigate the UK French enmity really, real well, keeping the US out of the war again, despite massive hysteria domestically, to actually align with the United Kingdom. So kind of the opposite of Washington himself. But I
yeah.
did not include John Adams, and I did not include Jefferson either. But they are, for me, in the honorable mentions. Um,
Well, and Jefferson is particularly tough too, because he's got the Barbary States military conflict, which the U.S. did well at the time, but it's in contradiction to what Washington was talking about, which is avoid
yeah,
these foreign entanglements. And then you got the Embargo Act of 1807, which was just a catastrophe. It was about banning U.S. exports to both Britain and France, and it just was terrible. And then like I had Reagan there. Maybe he's the sixth man, or maybe he's number five, because I mean there are so many blots on the resume. I'm thinking specifically of things like, Iran Contra, um, supporting the Mujahideen in Afghanistan, some of what he did when it came to Pinochet in Chile, or like Marko. Like he's got a checkered sort of history there, and you can argue that you can draw at least an indirect line between the rise of jihadism and like U.S. support of the Mujahideen that begins under Reagan's, like that's there, but I think there's no denying that he returned confidence to U.S. foreign policy after the Carter administration. He absolutely accelerated the Soviet decline by, going for increased American confidence, pressure on the Soviet economy, and ramping up military spending, knowing that they just couldn't keep up. And he did a lot to bolster U.S. alliances and NATO, which it's hard to go back in time to 79, 80, and the extent to which the U.S. was not confident about itself, in which the world was looking at the United States as not particularly confident. And then yet, halfway through his administration, he's able to pivot and have a détente with Gorbachev, and
yeah,
have the
that's
INF
the
treaty,
biggest.
and have all these
Yeah,
armed control things. So it was about peace through strength, but he actually got to the peace part, and he was actually willing to be both the tough guy and the guy who
landing.
materially made the world safer.
Yeah,
So
landing the
he
plane is important. I think that's your point. He took off in a very aggressive plane, where we're going to stand up to the Soviet Union. Many say he took us to the brink of nuclear war, but then he landed the plane. Two things in 1983 that I have in my book on Ronald Reagan, two brilliant moves. First and foremost, beating the shit out of Grenada. Just like, what's a better way to just get over your Vietnam? Grenada was like America's like rebound. You go to a bar, you just find a girl, and you're like, I'm going home with you tonight. It doesn't matter what they look like. America was in a long-term relationship. Vietnam didn't work out with that girl. It was really bad, like bad, PTSD after that one. It was just like, I'm going to go to a bar and get myself a Grenada, and that's what the United States did. So that's one. I mean, I don't think anybody out there is going to make a big deal about Grenada, but I am, because I think you see Trump doing very similar things as well. It's like, just Venezuela to me is kind of like Grenada of Reagan. And then the second thing he
I mean,
did,
if Trump could do that, I mean, it would be a major victory. I was actually talking with somebody the other day. I was trying to decide if there's ever been a U.S. military intervention that led towards regime change that was good, that was positive, and that was the only
that's the
example
only
we could
one.
really.
Maybe because it's a tiny island, but yeah. The second one is also happened in 1983. And an interesting, example of maybe where Reagan doesn't get enough credit was Beirut bombing. And the US saying just like, we out, really, really difficult. Like 200 American, no, sorry, I don't know how many, like 100 American Marines dead in a terrorist attack. And Reagan's like, nah, we out. That was really, difficult to do in a post-Vietnam environment. I think it makes a lot of sense, but also avoided an entanglement in the Middle East, which of course later others didn't do. Now, I did not include him. Why did I not include him? I feel that his greatest victory in his portfolio was relatively easy. And I say that because Soviet Union was crumbling. It's he just needed to kind of give it a gentle push, and he did. But he is the third on my bench, so I definitely had him up there. But let's talk about the two guys that. Well, actually, let's go through our starting lineup. So the two guys we both have, George Washington. I think it's pretty clear. I agree with you. The Jay Treaty was in my list as well. Neutrality of the U.S. I mean, he did all the right things to ensure that America was created. I mean, I do think in his portfolio should be the defeat of the United Kingdom as well. I think that's part of it.
Well, and he had the highest degree of difficulty of any of them by far. I mean, maybe Lincoln can make an argument there, but compared to all the others, like there were no institutions at this point. There was nothing that said the United States was going to be there. And like Washington really, like he gets a lot of credit for what he did as that revolutionary figure. But arguably more impressive is the way that he was also a steward of those initial phases of U.S. power and the path that he set the country on at a time when it was extremely difficult to do so. Like he doesn't get nearly enough credit.
No, he did get helped, and he got helped by global conditions. The United Kingdom and France go to war, epic war, world war, pretty much very quickly after he wins the independence of the United States. So in a way, like, let's not forget that there was, I think, also that. So that does distract the two biggest North American powers from what he just created. But nonetheless, God bless him. He did a great thing. I'm looking forward to the George Washington movie coming out. I think next year. It's going to be interesting. Would you take George Washington to negotiate a used car with you?
Well, that's your litmus test, because I definitely would take Donald Trump to negotiate the used car thing. I don't know that has any relevance to who I think should be in the White House, but that's a difference of opinion. But I don't know. I mean, George Washington doesn't even. The question there is, would I take George Washington to evaluate a mule-drawn carriage with me, or
I think yes.
or a horse, or I don't know. Like maybe, I guess.
I think so. I think he was somebody who did not rise up to the ranks of State Department or have a PhD in political science. I think he is somebody who knew the real world. I mean, that's the point, right? Like he had lived the real world, and I think that lived experience was important in subsequent understanding of limits of power. FDR.
Yeah.
Where did you have him in your starting five?
He was number 3.
Okay.
I think he deserves a lot of credit. So you cook, and then I'll add in.
I mean, I don't think we need to really spend any time on FDR. I think it's kind of obvious. Negotiating the pre-war context was very challenging, but he did it well. And then being shrewd and cunning enough to negotiate with someone like Joseph Stalin definitely passes my used car salesman test. He was brutal when he needed to be brutal, but also understood the limits of American power and that you needed to ally with some very nasty people. And you needed to concede to those nasty people that they also had the right to a sphere of influence. Otherwise, you were going to fight another war on the back of a pretty vicious one. And of course, what he did with Japan, the island hopping, the rallying of the nation, behind industrial, basically, might of the United States of America. I mean, I think that he understood what total war was. He was the right man for the right time, and he absolutely crushed it.
Yeah, I mean, this is a hobby horse of mine, and FDR is very different than Washington or Lincoln in the sense of, he's not he was from the patrician class, he was upper crust, and was seen with some of his policies on the domestic level as a traitor to his class for some of the things that he did in order to stay in power. I think it's actually not obvious though, Marko, because I think that the average American thinks that U.S. involvement in World War II was self-evident, that it was good versus evil, and the U.S. was good, and the Nazis and Japan were evil, and the United States was always going to go in. And the thing to me that is most remarkable about FDR was, even though strategically he wanted the U.S. in the war much earlier, U.S. public opinion was not with him, and he knew that if he pushed it too hard, he would lose, or that it would be completely self-defeating. And the strategic patience that he had, the Lend-Lease deals that he signed with Britain to try and give them a shot in the arm, to give them some chance to last long enough until Japan made that terrible mistake at Pearl Harbor and whipped up that American fervor to come into the war. Like, he played all of that completely perfectly. And I think he deserves a lot of credit for being the one with the long-term strategic vision, for understanding that he couldn't push the country, what were the limits of where he was able to push the country, but building up enough support so that when the moment happened, he capitalized on it. It was the day of infamy, and it was off to the races ever since then. And I mean, it's too bad his health failed him towards the end, because I'll give you a sneak preview. Truman is on my most incompetent list, because I think that a forward-thinking FDR, helping in that post-world reconstruction would have been very, very different than the bumbling that Truman did through that period. But I won't step on it too far. But I do think it's worth focusing on FDR from that point of view, to the extent that Americans think of themselves as fighting for good and righteousness and all these other things in World War II. You can thank FDR and all of his quasi-socialist New Deal policies and everything else. Like, it's all part of the package. If you like the U.S. as a savior of the world, you have to like FDR. Those two things go together.
That's why I say navigating the pre-war. And the reason I say navigating the pre-war is important, because the great New Deal was important. It was important to get the U.S. ramped up and armed ahead of the conflict itself. So he put into place, I think, the tools, institutional, policy, governance, and industrial tools necessary to actually win a total war. So, hats off to him for sure. Abraham Lincoln, obviously you already explained it. I think navigating France and the United Kingdom, which were clearly supporting the Confederacy, is huge. I think kicking the shit out of the Confederacy, though, is, in my book, a geopolitical reality. So the U.S. Civil War threatened the existence of the U.S., and he crushed it. I mean, I don't know what else we need to say here. Like, that is relevant.
There's two other things. Well, there's maybe one other thing I want to say about him, and one thing that I struggle with the entire list. I mean, he was also an incredibly insightful thinker about the U.S. strategic position. So, I mean, this is the 1860s. So the U.S. is not even close to a world power at this point. It's just starting to show promise of some of its potential. But, at one of his most famous speeches, he asks, at what point is the approach of danger to be expected? It's one of my favorite Lincoln quotes. And he said, if it ever reaches us, it must spring up among us. It cannot come from abroad. If destruction be our lot, we must ourselves be its author and finisher. As a nation of free men, we must live through all time or die by suicide. And that is as right today as it was then. And it's an incredibly thoughtful, strategic point of view. To your point about the war as well, I mean, he was willing to stare such barbarity and savagery in the face. I mean, he talked about the awful arithmetic. He cycled through Union generals because he needed somebody who was just going to spend the blood to defeat the Confederacy. And he wasn't going to get bogged down in, he didn't care about the number of casualties. He knew that he had more numbers and that he just had to crush them and keep all these other powers neutral at the same time. That took some cold-blooded some maneuvers. And then the part of this that makes me uncomfortable across the list, you sort of alluded to this already, but in some sense, like, the presidents that we most admire, I already referenced this with Jefferson and the Louisiana Purchase, are the ones who are willing to say fuck it to the Constitution when they feel like they need to. And there's a certain ends justifies the means. I wonder if you and I were podcasting in 1862, if I'd be here, the same contempt I show Donald Trump every once in a while, maybe I'd be talking about, Abrahamus Tyrannus, the first of his name, and all the terrible things that he did with suspending habeas corpus and martial law and everything else. Like, he ran roughshod over the U.S. Constitution, and it was for a greater good. Like, he had the right strategic perception in mind. But I think if I was criticizing him in 1862, I would have been very critical, because he was, running all over the place, or running all over the institutions that he was fighting to defend. That's a very difficult position to be in.
I can see myself often when I read history of the United States of America. And by the way, I am not as passionate about this as you are. So my empirical hat, my bag, to use the basketball terminology, is going to be much more barren. But I do think that when I have studied the pre-Civil War era, which is my favorite one, which is why I'm going to get to James Polk in a second, I've often thought that I would have supported Stephen A. Douglas. I have to say, that moderate kind of centrist, like, yeah, slavery is bad, but like, let's like go slowly. Lincoln was, righteous. And with that righteous fervor comes clarity of what needs to be done. And so when the war started, as you say, he did not hesitate to use vicious brutality, Sherman march from the plant, all that stuff.
It was not just righteous, though. Like, it's an incredible combination of a deep sense of justice with a ruthless pragmatism. Like, this is just, but also if X million people need to die, or if I need to break the law, so be it. Like, I have faith in what my conception of justice is, and I must risk everything for this conception of justice, which that can get off the rails very quickly. Like, it's a very slippery slope. But he navigated it, and I don't know, that takes a special type of personality and leader.
Well, also an interesting question then, like with FDR, both of them did the job and then died. FDR, of course, was on his fourth term. Abraham Lincoln was shot. And the question then becomes, did their successors prosecute the peace successfully? And I think that you would have to argue that in Lincoln's case, the answer is no. They did not, because Reconstruction fails, some decades later, though, but it fails miserably. And a large proportion of the American population descends back into second-class status. So that is the tragedy of that. I don't know if you could have changed that. Now, the one guy we did not have, did you have James Polk on the bench?
I had Polk on the bench and I had George H.W. on the bench, but I had Teddy ahead of them in the starting roster. So we can start with whoever you want.
I also had Teddy ahead of them, and then I swung him for George H.W. Bush just because I thought the degree of difficulty for Bush was the largest in the 20th century. Actually, so George H.W. Bush is my only, other than FDR, he's the only 20th century or 21st century guy on my list. We talked about this when we ranked just leaders. They're one of the reasons I did not have Donald Trump on my list of best, presidents or leaders in the world, is that I think it requires the U.S. president to really surprise me. Like, when you are running the best country in the world, the largest country in the world, the most powerful country in the world, bro, you better bring something to the game. You know what I mean? It's like Shaq. It's like Shaquille O'Neal. Like, why does nobody consider Shaq top 5 best player in the history of the NBA? Because he was 7'1", 330 pounds, and could move like a point guard. Like, if I had those attributes, bro, I would have averaged 50 points per game, right? So that's kind of like, you were lazy, you were, you had this body, these God's gifts, and yet, okay, fine, you won 3 titles. Well, 4 titles.
Yeah, you would have definitely at least learned how to shoot a free throw.
As an example, at least at the level of a high school girl. Okay, so James Polk. Polk is an interesting guy. I'm actually obsessed with pre-Civil War. That's the only part of U.S. history I really, really, really know very well, like the lead up to the Civil War. And Polk, of course, is in many ways to blame for the Civil War, because all these territorial acquisitions he made ended up being a problem. He didn't resolve it. But what I like about it is he's one of the few presidents in American history who campaigned on foreign policy and then delivered it. And very few people know this. Like, his campaign platform, other than some stuff with the Treasury, was all just like, I'm going to get the Oregon Territory. I'm going to get us to the Pacific Ocean. I'm going to get Texas. And I'm not going to run for re-election because F that, I'm a one-term president. And then he delivered absolutely every
All of
single
it.
thing.
He did all of it.
All of it.
He did.
I mean, it's just like astounding. This guy's like, I'm here. This is what I'm going to do at the end. And now you might say, okay, well, so he beat up Mexico. Wait, time out. Hold on. United Kingdom was a tricky adversary for the Washington State, Oregon, states. He had to negotiate with them, and he did not negotiate from a position of power necessarily, but we got the 49th parallel between the border between Canada and the US. So he did use diplomacy in that particular case. In the case of Mexico and Texas, yes, he was aggressive, but it was a quick and very vicious war that ended with the occupation of Mexico City, thanks to an amphibious landing by the U.S. Navy in the port of Veracruz. Like, this is crazy stuff. I mean, it's 1840s, people. It's 1840. The United States of America was like barely a country, and I'll come to that because of his demise. The point is, you're talking medieval shit. This guy's doing naval landings on the Pacific coast of Mexico, invasion of Mexico, occupation of Mexico City, and I hate being the guy who gives prominence to someone who just acquired territory. But I do think that for the United States of America to be a superpower, it did need two oceans. So yes, I agree with you. Louisiana Purchase, New Orleans, we understand Mississippi. Yes, big deal. But that's not a big deal in the 21st century.
Well, it's not just about the acquisition of territory, though, because I think the thing that we should underscore is that Polk came in, to your point, he had a geopolitical vision, and it was X, Y, Z, and he did everything. He did the war with Mexico, 54-40 or fight for you history nerds out there. Like he checked all the boxes. So if you were applying Polk to today, he would probably come in with okay, here's the U.S. strategic position. Here are the 5 things that need to get done. I'm going to do them. Like that level of clarity. Like yes, you can give him credit for the expansion of U.S. and all this territory. But I think the thing that really, in some ways, he's the purest geopolitical president on the list, because to your point, like can you think of another U.S. president who came with, here's my wish list, and I'm just going to do it all, and it's all going to be foreign policy, and then I'm out?
Yeah, he campaigned just for this. The other thing, by the way, what's interesting is he was completely, he was running for vice president. He did not expect to win. So it's an interesting story. He's also the only one. This is an interesting bit of trivia that I found out just recently, because again, I'm not really an expert on all the U.S. presidents, but he's the only president we have in history who was a Speaker of the House.
Yep.
Andrew Jackson.
He's the only one?
The only one. Yeah. Huh. I mean, at least that's what my research said. Maybe I'm wrong. The other thing that's
you're right. You're right. LBJ was not Speaker. Yeah, you're right. Mm-hmm.
Couple of other things about him that I find interesting, Jacob, is we always assign Panama to Theodore Roosevelt, to Teddy. But it was actually McKinley, but it was actually Polk who was the first to negotiate a military and economic relationship with New Granada, as it was called at the time, which was Colombia, Panama. So he was actually not just focused on the slice of pie that God had given America in North America. He was already in 1840s thinking about the Isthmus of Panama. That's crazy. This guy, who the hell is this guy? So what happens to him? All right. So what happens to this guy? He says one term and he sticks by it and dies 103 days later from cholera, which should just tell you how amazing it is what he did. He conquers half of the continent at a time when America is so poor and such a shitty country, okay, that the most powerful man in that country dies from cholera 100 days later at 53.
Yeah.
And I think that's just fascinating. If you want to know how difficult, the degree of difficulty for this dude, he died 100 days later because we couldn't cure his damn cholera. Like, it's crazy. Just unbelievable. He's number 3 on my list. The last one that we disagree with is George H.W. Bush. Now, why I effectively elevate him above everyone in the 20th century other than FDR.
Yeah,
again,
why?
So really hard to impress me. You know, I do have Reagan for all the reasons that you noted. We already talked about Reagan. He's on my bench. I felt that Reagan's job was simpler. There was an evil empire, and he needed to defeat it. That had been something that every other president before Reagan had to do. With George H.W. Bush, it was a degree of difficulty because no one had ever done this. What do you do with victory? What do you do with victory? You know? And I think that the way he managed the collapse of the Soviet Union, ensuring that there wasn't a victory that created angst later on, which of course we did get angst later on, but I would blame Russia much more than I would blame George H.W. Bush's peace. And so I think that the way he managed the collapse of the Soviet Union was very impressive. It was a presidency defined by foreign politics that he passed with flying colors. Reunification of Germany was also good. The only black eye on him is that he failed to prevent a civil war in my home country, Yugoslavia. But that's, even though it was a big deal in my life, it's a minor issue globally. And then, of course, there's a very, very important event in 1991. In 1990, 1991, the Desert Storm. I think that we do not understand the significance of this conflict against Saddam and how big it was. America is coming out of the Vietnam War. Ronald Reagan is out there smashing Grenada and abandoning Lebanon. The United States is on the back foot. Saddam Hussein studies American reaction to the Vietnam War, and he says these guys are pussies. They're not going to fight. He puts a 1 million-man army in the field, and George H.W. Bush sends Storm and Norman, General Schwarzkopf, to the desert, and they eviscerate Iraq's 1 million-man army within weeks. Now, in retrospect, now when we observe this from the future, we say, well, of course they did. Americans got GPS. The Iraqis didn't. But at the time, there was actual anti-war protests in the United States of America. People were writing op-eds in Washington Post about how this is the next Vietnam, this is the next quagmire. George H.W. Bush won that war so clinically and so thoroughly that we don't even think to give him credit for it. Because we say, well, you were fighting Iraq. It was the fourth largest military on the planet at the time. The other issue that he did brilliantly, which of course his son failed to follow, as I'm sure we will discuss.
As we will get to.
is he did not think that it was necessary to basically impose a peace on Iraq that required Saddam Hussein to swing from the gallows in downtown Baghdad. And so it was a limited use of American power in an incredibly vicious way. And of course, a lot of that, by the way, a lot of that should go to Schwarzkopf and the American military. But I think that George H.W. Bush allowed them to prosecute a war very, very well. So he makes my top 5 because I just think the degree of the difficulty there, Jacob, fighting a land war, the largest land war, by the way, since World War II, so quickly after Vietnam War, with all of that PTSD of the American public and the American military was challenging, and then dealing with the peace, right? Peace of collapse of Soviet Union. What do you do when you are suddenly thrust as a hegemon? And he gave us, 20 years of global peace. So well done him.
Yeah, he was on my bench, and I have a soft spot for him. You talked about some of his great successes, one you didn't mention, and I know this because I was actually a fellow at the George H.W. Bush Foundation for U.S.-China Relations for 2 years. And he also, Tiananmen Square happens under his rule, and the Chinese cracked down on protesters in 1989, and Bush has a really tough decision to make. Does he go after China because it's this ideological affront to what the U.S. is supposed to stand for, especially as we're getting into the end of the Cold War and everything else? You've got, literally tanks rolling over people in the streets. Or do you take the pragmatic approach and deal with China pragmatically and say, okay, we're going to have differences, but as George H.W. Bush believed at the time, he thought that China was the most consequential relationship that the United States was going to have, and that he couldn't just browbeat them into submission, that he had to have some kind of pragmatic relationship with them in order to move forward. Jury's still out on whether that was correct. I mean, I think you can think about there's a generation of U.S. foreign policy figures, I think, who thought that China would eventually become more Western and liberal if we just made them richer. And I think you can at least situate some of the beginning of that policy in George H.W. Bush. I think he himself and his administration was more sophisticated. I think it got simplified as Clinton and others took it there. But that's also a thing that was under his belt. I'm just less impressed with the degree of difficulty, I guess, because it's the unipolar moment. Like, yes, you didn't have a lot to fall back on in terms of historical precedent, but you had no real challengers here. I'm much more impressed.
Yep.
The reason Teddy makes my starting lineup is because the United States is still, I mean, yes, the Spanish-American War happens 1898 to 1900, so the U.S. is up and coming, but it's still by no means a global power. Teddy has to brandish the big stick to make sure that everybody understands there's a corollary to the Monroe Doctrine and it's going to be enforced by him. It's nice that Polk did these things to sort of start laying the groundwork for Panama, but it's Teddy who says, no, like, we want Panama. We're going to be a two-ocean navy. We're going to build up the Great White Fleet, everything else. Like, that's all him. And then don't forget, like, he mediated the Russia-Japan War and won that Nobel Peace Prize that President Trump is always angling for. And that, I mean, it didn't work in the long run, but it did help balance Japan a little bit. And it was the first real attempt of the United States to be this arbiter of balance of power in East Asia. I think it's a big deal. Not just,
I think it's a big... Kissinger makes a big deal about that in his book, Diplomacy. I agree with you. I think, look, I had him in the starting lineup. I subbed out George H.W. Bush. In a way, I think Theodore Roosevelt... if we were making a basketball team, I think Teddy Roosevelt, I like him coming off the bench because he can be the spark plug. I like George H.W. Bush because he's such a specialty guy. He's like a three-point shooter, There's just something special about George H.W. Bush, but I agree with you. Teddy is great, and I think that, honestly, who would I take to negotiate a car from a used car salesman? Teddy or the head of the CIA who went to Harvard and Yale or whatever? Definitely Teddy. I think Teddy would definitely come with me over George H.W. Bush. I think George H.W. Bush is a great president, but, he didn't know the price of milk. In, what was it? When he was at the checkout line, he didn't know that we had the...
Yeah, he didn't. But I actually disagree with you. I think that George H.W. Bush would probably know, like, the car dealer's uncle once removed or something. And be like, that time that I was blah, 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 blah. Whereas, like, Teddy would just be like, you're going to give me this or I'm going to smack you across the face. Like, he's the irrational confidence guy, right, that comes in off the bench that is just like, yes, I'm going to tear it up. I'm the greatest thing ever. Like,
Malik Monk of presidents. Listen, by the way, Teddy Roosevelt, if you go to the National Museum of History in the United States, in New York City, is that the one that has all the Teddy Roosevelt? It's the one, the Night of the Museum. You know the children's movie, The Night of the Museum? Mm-hmm. So that museum, it had, exactly, Ben Stiller. So I walk in here, it's like 2019 with my kids, and there's these Teddy Roosevelt, like, quotes, right, in this museum, in the foyer. And I got to tell you, Jacob, I was like, I can't believe that the combination of political correctness and Me Too movements did not just like take those down. Because it's just basically like, to be a man is, it's just like, you got to grab the life by the balls, and it's, anyways, my point is, hey, listen, Teddy Roosevelt, I feel bad. You maybe feel bad not putting him in the starting five. I do think that it's a little bit of assumed that he should be in there. The only thing I would say about it is that McKinley before him did set the groundwork for a lot of things that followed later. Now, McKinley is considered, we do emphasize McKinley a lot, like Howard Lutnick obviously obsesses about him and stuff. He was more of a figurehead. Like, there were people behind McKinley who were pursuing American foreign policy. His tariffs, by the way, that everybody obsesses with on the right were deeply unpopular and got him, like, basically, he lost the election because of it. So just FYI for anybody out there, you're looking for historical analogies. But I think that McKinley and Roosevelt kind of are a continuum, and so that's why I didn't want to put Roosevelt in the starting five.
But Teddy is also just such a badass. I mean, we could do the Rough Rider stuff in Cuba. We could do the fact that, like, in 1912, he literally gets shot and gives a speech after he gets shot. He's like bleeding through his shirt. Like, Jacob, there's been nobody like this guy.
Listen, you're right. I mean, this is why we have him in our consciousness so high, because he's such a badass. I know. But and George H.W. Bush is a squirrely nerd who was like a CIA head, right? Like I get it. I don't know. I'm not changing my view, but I do feel bad about keeping Teddy on the bench, and I just hope that being on the bench will upset him, and he will come in and rain down the, threes from the bench.
Yeah, more likely he'll request a trade to the rival because he doesn't want to deal with you anymore.
That is true.
Who else was on? Who else is on your honorable mention list? Because we've HW was on my honorable mention. I had Polk, but I had two others on my bench that we haven't talked about yet. Maybe go through the rest of your bench that we haven't talked about yet.
Well, I'm surprised that okay, so McKinley gets brought up a lot. He's on my bench. I get it, but whatever. It is what it is. Like he got his Hawaii.
Not on my bench.
Hawaii's worth the bench. It's the nicest part.
Did he get us Hawaii? I don't think that was him, was it?
Yeah. That was
I
him.
guess technically he does it, but I think we got to give that to President Tyler because he was the one who asserts that the Monroe Doctrine extends to Hawaii and starts unfolding like the U.S. imperial embrace around the island. So yeah, I mean he can complete it, but I think Tyler gets that one.
I mean that's fine. Fareed Zakaria makes a really good point in his PhD dissertation. I know I've pooped on Zakaria before. He's become too establishment, but his political science dissertation is great. From wealth to power. He talks about McKinley and state capacity. In other words, the thing is, Teddy wouldn't have been able to do what he did if the state capacity wasn't built before him. So that's kind of where, some of this. Andrew Johnson is on my list. I feel bad. It's Alaska. Like, whatever. Like, I feel dirty saying that. Just all these territorial acquisitions. We shouldn't be putting too much on it. And then finally, I do have Truman on the bench. I know you have him as top 5 worst presidents.
You have him on the bench. Oh my,
Yes.
We're about to get into it now. Tell me. By the way, ChatGPT was with you. Like I was asking it to give me a list to get started, and it had Truman in the top 5, and I had to be like, "What the fuck are you smoking, ChatGPT? There's no way Truman belongs on this list." But okay, tell me what.
I mean, like Marshall Plan, NATO, Bretton Woods. These are the things like it's post-war.
He's copying and pasting FDR's plans and then actually butchering them in the implementation. Come on now. And then we've got Korea sitting there like a massive venereal disease that just the gift that keeps on giving. Like what? Please.
Well, I think, yeah, I mean, that's fair. I'm not too, I mean, once we talk about the worst presidents, we can bring him up. Let's finish my bench because my bench is very deep.
Okay. Sorry.
Two guys that I have on my bench that both will elicit a lot of hatred. Okay. So here are two presidents who I do think were good in foreign policy. But when I say hatred, I think you know which two of these are. First and foremost, on the right, representing the conservative side, is Richard Nixon. I think that Richard Nixon deserves to be on the bench. I considered him as a starter for just a second. He was a shrewd navigator of foreign policy, and he did flip China. So let's not forget that. That was a big, big deal. Vietnamization, of course, really stupid, ramping up, but I understand what he was trying to do. He was trying to escalate to de-escalate. Fine. Others have done that as well. Was it necessary? Probably not. Also détente with the Soviet Union. Despite being an ardent anti-communist, he managed to put aside his ideology and, I mean, quite frankly, his entire identity and his entire career. He managed to put that behind him in both, flipping China and persecuting détente with the Soviet Union. He was dealt a very tough hand, and he got out of it, in my view. Obviously, then domestic politics. Also kind of a crook and a criminal, but used car. I'm taking Richard with me. I'm taking Dick. Second guy, and this is where, how everybody kind of thinks you're anti-Trump and everybody kind of thinks like I have sympathy for Trump. And I've had people come to me like, oh, well, finally, nice to see a conservative voice. I'm like, whoa. Bathing a loofah nihilism, baby. Don't. Well, this is where all those fans, all those people who listen to this show just so I can make fun of Jacob and his Trump derangement syndrome are now going to lose all respect for me because I am going to
turn on the TikTok camera. Let's get the TikTok camera on right now.
I'm going to put Barack Obama on my bench.
Wow.
Foreign policy. Absolutely. And not just because he actually, of all these gentlemen, can actually play basketball. Although that's not fair. George Washington was like, what was it? It's like 7 feet tall, so he probably would have been able to play basketball one way or another. So yes, I have Barack Obama. Look, say what you will. If someone brings up Libya, I'll just punch you in the fucking face. All right, and I'll tell you why. Benghazi, man. Shut up. We don't have time for that. He gets elected in 2008. United States of America has 250,000 troops in 2 idiotic wars. And he is given the challenge of unwinding the U.S. in those 2 wars. Does he fully get it done? No. But given the political constraints, given the geopolitical constraints, he does as good of a job as he can. And then the second issue is he does begin the pivots to China. Now, he did not do enough. Yes, that is true. But the United States of America had 250,000 troops in the sandbox. It had sunk $2 trillion. He did the best he could given a very, very difficult situation. And I think that there is much more similarity between Barack Obama and Donald Trump than people give them credit for. Both of them understood the emerging multipolarity of the world, and both of them tried to handle it in a non-normative, non-moralistic, amoral foreign policy. The one, of course, there are many problems he makes. That's why he's not in the starting lineup. You should never set red lines you don't follow. You should never say things like, well, if you put on a Kobe Bryant jersey, doesn't make you a member of the Lakers, when he was referring to the Islamic State, even though he was correct. He was correct. They were a flash in the pan, and they were easily handled by a combination of American air power and Iranian military strength. He was smart enough to ally with Iran on the battlefields of Iraq. Little known fact, but Iranian commanders were calling in A-10 Warthog airstrikes to defeat the Islamic State. He made that happen. And then finally, yes, so red line in Syria was stupid. And then, yes, letting the French and the British decide that Gaddafi should be destroyed. He probably should have protested that a lot more than he did. He protested that initially, but then he got suckered into this idiotic war that Italians told the rest of Europe was really stupid and would lead to a migration crisis.
Wow. Okay. I mean, so we have 2 pretty big disagreements with Truman and with Obama. I'll say that Nixon was also on my bench, and it's funny. Maybe you'll get some of the Trump derangement syndrome emails now too. I honestly, I am not above showing contempt and making jokes at the man's expense. I did the same thing with Joe Biden, by the way. I'll probably do that with every president who ever lives. If you want to know where my real biases are, though, I hate Henry Kissinger with the fire of 1,000 burning suns.
Interesting.
I just think he's an odious little. Yes, I'm with Christopher Hitchens on this. I think he was an odious little toad of a man. I hate the whole establishment tipping of the knot. Oh, you have to go meet Kissinger because he's the grand master of American strategy and geopolitics. Like, give me a break. He's basically a war criminal, and Nixon helped empower him. All of that said, like, Nixon is on my bench. Like, I don't like him. I don't like anything that he did. I don't like who he empowered, but there's no denying, to your point, yes, he could be, frothing at the mouth about communism and then make the switch on China. He could think about the right way. He was really the first multipolar president. If you go back to, he is the first president I have found that uses the word multipolar and thinks about the world in those terms. He was a little bit early, and arguably, like, what comes afterwards, it might have been that way if not for Reagan and not for some of the own goals that the Soviet Union created. But he's absolutely on the list, even though if I hate him. But so if you're wondering about my bias, listeners, I'm guilty as charged when it comes to Nixon and Kissinger. I'm much more ambivalent and much more opportunistic in how I like to make fun of whoever the current occupant of the White House is. Yeah, go ahead.
Tell us, Jacob, where did Henry Kissinger touch you? Point.
Thankfully,
I did not expect
thankfully
that.
He never touched.
Holy shit!
You don't? Oh yeah, I detest him. He's a little toad.
Wow, that's so harsh.
I'll even tell you, my dad passed away 2 or 3 weeks after Kissinger, and when I was giving my dad's eulogy, the first thing I said at his funeral was, it gave my dad great comfort in the last weeks of his life to know that he had outlived Henry Kissinger. Like, that was my opening line from my dad's eulogy. Like, that's how far down it goes.
as a failed political scientist in the IR field, obviously, I have a lot of affinity for Kissinger, but I also have read many critical things about him. So I understand that there's two sides of this. One of the things that I would just say about the tipping of the hat by the establishment to Kissinger, I think, is idiotic, right? But I do think what I think Kissinger did right is he separated foreign policy from populism. And I think the problem, and now we're going to get into the losing five, starting five. And to me, a lot of the mistakes they made was that they could not separate, policy from populism. So
yeah, but before we get to the last stuff, I just want to say I don't vehemently disagree with your Obama take. I had him sort of middlingly there, but I don't have him on my bench. Like I wouldn't want him anywhere. Like he's maybe he's a good stats, bad team kind of guy. Like it's just not worth it because he's got all the trappings of it. And yes, he had this realist tendency, but Putin took one look at him and was like, whatever, I'm going to do whatever I want, whenever I want. This guy's not going to do anything to me. China, you get the rise of Xi Jinping and the exact same thing. Obama's always, he's a day late. He's a dollar short. Like he has this idea of how he wants to be thought of and how countries should think of him. And I think he lets all that get to his head. And then in practice, like, yes, he did have this realist instinct, and he was a breath of fresh air compared to the neocons that came both before him and after him. I mean, Biden is a neocon. George W. Bush was a neocon.
Oh, we're coming. Coming.
Like we're coming for him. So
we're close. We're close.
I'll give him some of his credit there, but like I don't have him anywhere near the top 10.
The way both you and I describe Richard Nixon, he feels like he's on our bench because he can give us 5 fouls. Does it feel like that's why we have him on our roster? Like, that guy's giving us trouble. Dick, get off the bench. You're in. Go give him hell for 10 minutes. He's just an attack dog. Well, sort of. I'll give you the appropriate metaphor here. He's the really niche metaphor is to compare him to Ivan Johnson for his 2 or 3 years on the Atlanta Hawks. But the reason you have Nixon on the bench is because he's the Zaza Pachulia that sticks his leg out underneath Kawhi in the playoffs. That's what I mean.
That's why he's.
That's what I mean. That's why we have him. That's amazing.
Exactly.
I love the fact that that's why we have him. You're right. Barack Obama might be on my bench just because he's just a good-looking man. Sometimes you just need a good-looking fucking guy with a nice shot, jump shot. And there it is. All right.
Whatever floats your boat. But before we get to the haters, I just want to this is 2021, so Biden not yet in this list. But for our 2021 presidential historian survey, their top 5.
Oh, please, yes, thank you.
I just want to tell you their top 5: FDR number 1, George Washington number 2, Abraham Lincoln number 3, Theodore Roosevelt number 4. Number 5 is going to surprise you. It surprised me, and I thought about him for my bench, but the degree of difficulty was too low, and I didn't love him. Number 5 is Dwight D. Eisenhower.
Okay, well, he's on my losers.
Yeah, actually. Well, so we'll get to him. That's the top 5 for the experts.
He's my Truman. He's my Truman.
He's your Truman.
You don't like Truman. I don't like Eisenhower, which is interesting because that's who is to blame, Truman or Eisenhower. And now we're going to talk.
Now we're going to talk.
What else do they have? Did they have honorable mentions? Or was that it?
Oh, no, they have the whole list. So that was just the top 5. I can round out the top 10 for you because they go all the way through. So that's the top 5. 6 is James Monroe. 7, Harry Truman. 8, George H.W. 9, Ronald Reagan. 10, John Quincy Adams.
So why don't we have Monroe on our lists? I mean...
I think that's totally a degree of difficulty thing because all the hard things have already been accomplished, and it's basically the only thing Monroe is known for is like, hey, Western Hemisphere, this is mine, and that's he's like fairly uncontroversial because all the hard stuff had already been done, and he's the one that says now America will be powerful, and I think he gets a lot of credit for it.
And that was what 1823. What was the Monroe Doctrine?
Yeah, I think so.
Let's find out. Monroe. This tells you how much prep we did for this. So it was 1823.
Look at that. Look at you. All right.
Well, but listen, here's why I don't have him. It's exactly what you say. By 1823, America is a country. It's no longer going to be attacked by Britain or France. Like, it's safe. And then the dude is like, the Western Hemisphere is ours, which then requires another 70 years before anyone can... Like, do you know why nobody in the world was like opposing the Monroe Doctrine because they were laughing at it. It's 1823. 20 years later, the president of the United States of America dies from cholera. Like pump the brakes, America, right? So why would we put him? It's kind of a weird thing. Okay. The other thing that I'm interested.
Oh yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry. No, please.
Well, I just wanted some of the others on your list that you might be interested where they fall. Because
Polk. I mean, I'm surprised they don't have Polk up there. I mean, I think that's a travesty, but okay. He's not even in top 10. I guess because of the Civil War.
He's top 20. So he's sandwiched between McKinley and Ulysses S. Grant around number 20. They have him behind John F. Kennedy. I think that's terrible.
That is terrible.
Obama is sitting there around 23, 24. And then you mentioned Andrew Johnson on your bench. He's the third worst president in U.S. history on this list. He's three from the bottom, and I wouldn't say he's that far from me, but he was pretty bad too. But so that rounds out the list.
One guy we didn't talk about, James Madison, War of 1812.
Yes, which earns him a spot on my bottom five. As much as I love Madison, the Federalist paper author and everything else, he's on the bottom five for me.
All right, well, let's do bottom five then. Okay.
All right, let's get into it. You start.
All right, so my 5 worst foreign policy presidents, and some of these did great things, but they did not do good on foreign policy. First and foremost, Joe Biden.
Wow. Okay.
I would say the worst president in history of the United States of America.
Wow.
For foreign policy. Yes. Completely misjudged the time and allowed various, I was going to say second rate. Honestly, they don't even deserve a ranking. Foreign policy folks to run the country's foreign policy. So Joe Biden is number 1. George W. Bush, number 2. LBJ, number 3.
Mm-hmm.
Which pains me because, as you know, I went to University of Texas. My wife worked for a period of time for the LBJ Presidential Library. I admire LBJ immensely for what he did domestically in many ways. He did a lot. There we go. Is that the bust of LBJ? Yeah. One of the greatest stories.
Come here. You're going to sit with me for this part of the conversation, okay?
One of the greatest, rags to riches stories, I think, in American history. Just an incredible man in many, many ways. But I think the Vietnam thing was terrible. And to his credit, although he's on my list of the 5 losers, he had the, the gumption and the knowledge that he effed up. So he knew that. And he accepted it. Eisenhower and JF Kennedy round out my top 5 worst presidents for foreign policy. I did not go into the 19th century. Part of the reason that so many of my presidents in the losing 5 are the 20th and 21st century. And I don't have anyone from the 19th century. Okay, so I guess we're going to talk about James Madison, declares war in the United Kingdom. Probably stupid, but let's leave that aside for a second. The thing is, the degree of difficulty. To me, the losing 5 had everything going from them. From a basketball perspective, they're all 6'7", 6'8", 6'9". They've got a great jump shot, and then they just effed up. They had it all, and then they messed up. Honorable mention.
Who was your number 4? I missed your number 4 because I was busy getting my bust of. Then who was your number 5?
Kennedy.
Kennedy. Okay, great.
JFK.
Okay,
JFK has a huge following. Of course, we all have read the 13 Days. We've all watched the movie. Good-looking man, stood up to the Soviet Union in Cuba, and so on and so on. He almost caused World War III. Bay of Pigs, really stupid. Generally speaking, unnecessarily aggressive, and I think he was led by popular opinion more so than maybe any other president. Eisenhower, military coup in Iran, totally unnecessary, leads to Iran flipping, and domino theory was, I think you're going to blame Truman, which is fine. We can blame whoever you want. The point is, this domino theory ultimately led to the U.S. committing itself to Vietnam. Now, again, like with JFK, we all have a soft spot for Eisenhower too. JFK, we love him because he was good looking and, had an affair with Marilyn Monroe. hashtag nice. With Eisenhower, we all remember him as an incredible general, much more sane than Patton. And of course, his final speech tugs on the heartstrings of every liberal, where he, talks about the rising military-industrial complex, which he helped define and create. So yes, on your last day of presidency, he's like, "Oh shit, I fucked up on this fight. Like, we should pump the brakes a little bit on this." Like, buddy, you're the guy who created it, and we got into all sorts of trouble as a country afterwards. So I don't think he was that successful. LBJ Vietnam, just you can't ignore it. It was a huge blunder. And then George W. Bush completely ignored the lessons of his father. I'm doing this very quickly. We can obviously have debates on all of them. And then Joe Biden, I just think completely misjudged what world America lives in, pursued an overly moralistic, value-laden policy, deepened the enmity towards China, had absolutely no ability to end the war or threaten Russia in any way, shape, or form. And with Israel and Palestine, was basically stuck in some sort of a neutral mode where he was just kind of like spinning in place. So yeah, I think basically, led the world onto the path of World War III, particularly with China, and was so afraid to negotiate with China. It was so afraid to make any agreements with China because of political domestic opposition that would have painted him as a dove, that I think he is definitely a bad president. Obviously, honorable mentions, there's a bunch of them. Started with Carter. I just thought it was too easy, so I did not put him in the top 5.
Yeah.
Yes.
We'll get there. Let me go at the top 5, and then we can do some honorable mentions.
Sure.
You've shocked me a few times. I am shocked that Joe Biden is your worst. I wouldn't be shocked if he was in your top 5 or honorable mention, but I'm shocked that he's your worst. And we can get into it a little bit. So for me, by far my worst.
Jacob, we got lucky. They didn't get worse during his presidency.
Oh, I mean, we can get into that in a little bit.
And
so
by the way, I did not mention.
One...
Sorry to interrupt again.
Mm-hmm.
I did not mention Afghanistan. The withdrawal from Afghanistan, which is the thing that he gets blamed for the most, to me is like, well, what did you expect was going to happen? And how is that Joe Biden's fault? Why is that his fault? Like, Donald Trump negotiated that withdrawal. We were going to withdraw. It was going to look bad no matter what. Don't pin that on Joe Biden. Pin absolutely everything else on him.
Everything else. No, for me, it's LBJ. Even though I love LBJ, the fact that I have a bust of LBJ that I can take out and he'll be joining it. He's for those of you watching on YouTube, if we put this on YouTube, he's sitting right next to me right now because I need you to hear this, Lyndon. I love him. Also, I love Robert Caro. I love the Robert Caro books. There's not a better domestic president. You and I were arguing over text message about the government shutdown, and I was telling you the Democrats need an LBJ, somebody who doesn't care about morality or anything else, whose self-worth is tied up in him actually being able to pass an agenda that is helpful for the country. Like, he was an incredible combination of all these different things.
Incredible.
Robert Caro has a tremendous description of Johnson as, think of him as, a heavy piece of rope with different strands within it. And a lot of it is like black and twisted and evil, but there's this one gold strand that is running through it. And that gold strand, like, ironically, by his powers and force of persuasion, allows him to do all these other things. But he loses it all because he doesn't know what the heck he's doing on foreign policy.
Yeah.
And all the things that make him so formidable when it comes to domestic policy.
Yes.
He's just a total noob when it comes to foreign policy. And he is so insecure about his lack of knowledge that he needs to be a tough guy that he gets himself into all of these different pickles. Which is why, by the way, when Donald Trump was initially elected, the two previous leaders that I thought the most about were Huey Long, for obvious reasons, and LBJ, because I was worried about a president who was so focused on his own shortcomings and insecurity that he would be dragged into different foreign policies that were bad for the Republic based on those insecurities, because I think that's like where LBJ was. And that's why I say the jury's not out on Trump. I think he's avoided that baser part of his instinct, but it's still there. And I think you can see countries like trying to play off of that, and some, successfully. So I think Trump has mitigated the damage because he's conflict averse, but like, it's there, and it's something I worry about.
Can we stop?
Yeah, please go.
Let's talk about LBJ.
Let's talk about him. I love him. I'll talk about him all day. We could do 3 hours just on him. I'm obsessed.
No, I 100% agree with you, and I think that he knew it. That's his savings grace. He did not try to fight it. he did not try to, like George W. Bush has. I would have a lot more respect for George W. Bush if he owned up to his mistakes. And LBJ did. He could have ran. He did not. Now you might say, well, his polling was terrible, so like whatever. Well, okay, fine, but didn't prevent Joe Biden. The other thing about LBJ that I think is very interesting is that effectively what you're describing is we're putting this starting five of the worst foreign policy presidents. So it's a starting five of ineffective guys. To use the basketball analogy, these are 5 players who are terrible at basketball, but he was like an all-star in baseball. You know what I mean?
He was a GOAT. He was the GOAT for domestic policy. And the tragic thing about him is he was so bad at the foreign policy element that it spoiled all of his domestic agenda. If he hadn't done that, I think we would live in a fundamentally better country if he'd been able to get through all those aspects of the Great Society. Instead, not only does he start the lack of trust in U.S. institutions because of Gulf of Tonkin, he also blows out inflation because he's trying to have his war and his Great Society at the same time. And you can't do both. You can draw a line, I think, from stagflation and all the problems of the 70s to LBJ trying to do Great Society 100%. And the Vietnam War at the same time. And if he had just done the Great Society, if he had just doubled down on what he knew, I think we would look at him as the greatest domestic policy president in the modern era, bar none.
Anybody who blames Nixon or Carter for the inflation doesn't understand macroeconomics. It was LBJ's fault. It was 100%. Inflation was already rising well before OPEC cut off oil. So that was just the final sort of straw that broke the camel's back. So you're right. LBJ, yep. Okay, next.
And these top 2 for me, by the way, are head and shoulders above all the rest. I think there's the 2 worst, and then there's everybody else. So in some ways, it's a big 2. George W. Bush. I mean, I have such contempt for the neocons as well. And I take your point about him not having any self-awareness about the mistakes that he made. But I mean, tying the realization of U.S. foreign policy interests to discrete moral end goals and believing the whole end of history nonsense and continuing to push on it even when it was obviously not true. I mean, he just, he was just, we're lucky that things didn't get worse with George W. Bush. And not to mention all the deception around Iraq 2.0 and the weapons of mass destruction and it's just a whole coterie of bad. Do you want to dwell on him some more? Or
I think a couple of things that I just wanted to add to. LBJ didn't really reveal what he made a mistake in. And I mean, I think Vietnam is of course the big one. I think nothing else needs to be said. With George W. Bush, there's a couple of things. It's over-indexing on chasing terrorists around the world, which is dumb. I'm gonna say something callous that maybe 85% of Americans listening will hate, but sorry guys, Al-Qaeda was never, ever, ever anywhere near an existential threat to the United States of America, ever. It sucks. Bunch of dudes flying planes into buildings, that sucks. But they had neither the means, not the tools, not the historical moment to break America in any way, shape, or form. And the United States of America broke its own rules, broke its own norms, broke its own piggy bank, and then broke its own military on chasing these guys, thus accomplishing precisely what Osama bin Laden wanted. So, who won? Oh, no, it wasn't the guys who killed Osama. That's what Americans like to watch on YouTube when Barack Obama says we got him to make themselves feel good. The truth is Osama bin Laden won the war on terror. And Israel made the exact same mistake, by the way, now in pursuit of Hamas. This is classical, you get the society to turn on itself. But the truth is that Al-Qaeda was never an existential threat, and George W. Bush allowed Cheney and the public opinion to sucker him into these idiotic conflicts. They have accomplished nothing. In fact, we have a former Al-Qaeda militant, God bless him, playing basketball with the U.S. military on the lawn of the White House in 2025 because fuck it, right? Who else is going to run Syria? So that's George W. Bush. I mean, I think that he's a truly terrible geopolitical president, and so is everybody who served in his administration. Should basically never, ever be near anything in foreign policy. There should be a black mark. The other thing with George W. Bush that I think is incredible is the ignorance of China. To your point that it was under Obama that Xi Jinping rose, fine, fair, but also like Xi Jinping is a product of American distraction for 15 years, which was Bush's fault, not Obama's fault. Obama tried to do something about it. And he ran out of resources. So you're right.
I'll just add with George W. Bush 2 other little things. He's the one who shook Putin's hand and said, I saw into his soul and he's a good guy and we can work this out. So he totally got Russia wrong. And then he's he's the inverse Polk. He came with the axis of evil: North Korea, Iran, Iraq. You know what are still 3 problems for U.S. foreign policy? North Korea, Iran, Iraq. The axis of evil is still with us. He did terribly.
They're terrible. He's the reverse of Polk. You're so right. Our foreign policy president in 2004, he wasn't. 2004, the election is about this. It's John Kerry versus Bush. Bush sets out his lines, and as you said, yes, Polk accomplished his. Bush did not. So, but
none of them.
But also the other thing that I think he taught America, and this is a valuable lesson, just because he will be a good guy to have a beer with, you might not want him running your foreign policy.
Well, he could probably buy a good used car, though.
I don't know about that. Yes, he will. You know what? You know what? You're right. You're right in Texas. I think he will show up. And by the way, LBJ also. I was just thinking when we were talking, LBJ would have crushed it. Yes. He'd get 2 cars.
He would have had the dealership by the way. He would have walked out with he would have owned the dealership. No, absolutely right.
Next.
Number 3 for me is Truman, and it's not for the reasons that you suggested. It really, and by the way, I once got into a screaming match with George Friedman about this in George's own home. I'm sure George is not listening to this, but I think my views on Truman, he just absolutely hated them, in part because he loved MacArthur, and I've definitely taken the anti-MacArthur version of Truman's history. I'm there. And there's lots of things I like about Truman, by the way. My grandmother's from Missouri. Truman's from Missouri. He's a good Missouri guy. Been to the library. I think on domestic policy, I appreciate how sort of straightforward, there's lots of things to speak for him. But I think Korea was just such a massive geopolitical blunder. And I think it was a blunder on 2 levels. Number 1, his administration literally telegraphed to the Soviets that they weren't going to stick up for Korea. They defined it as outside U.S. security interests. And then when the North Koreans crossed the border, they suddenly changed their minds really quickly and say, oh, no, we actually do have to defend Korea. And they spin up the whole thing for a war that literally does absolutely nothing. The line doesn't move. It becomes a U.S.-China war. Millions of people die. And for what? For nothing. So there's that element. There's also the element of he decides it's an international police action that he gets to do with the United Nations. And I'm sure other U.S. presidents wouldn't have done it, but every single U.S. president since Truman gets to use that justification to do things that are illegal. What Trump is doing with the Venezuelan drug boats and poor fishermen is illegal. What Obama was doing with the jihadists in the Arabian Peninsula, illegal. What all these different, Reagan, you go down the list. It is all enabled by President Truman giving the middle finger to the Constitution, not to save the Republic like Lincoln, not to double the size and secure the Mississippi River, but because he got caught with his pants down on Korea and didn't want to be seen as a weak Democrat or not up to FDR's standard. It was such a colossal error, and I just have no patience for it. And it's the cautionary tale that I worry about the most in terms of U.S.-China relations going forward, especially in the context of Taiwan. I don't really stay up at night at all thinking about, is China going to invade Taiwan? I do stay up at night thinking, is some future U.S. president going to pull a Truman on Taiwan? When China eventually reabsorbs Taiwan, which, sorry listeners, it will eventually. I don't know if it's going to happen in 10 years or 50 years, but it will eventually. And maybe they'll be in charge. I don't know. But eventually Taiwan and mainland China will become some kind of entity. I'm willing to say that at some point. Will somebody pull a Truman and say, oh yeah, that's an existential U.S. interest, and we should send U.S. soldiers to go protect that. I hate that. So that's why Truman earns number 3 on my list. Pick it apart if you want.
Well, I think that you're right. He was an autopilot in a lot of the things that I give him credit for, like the Marshall Plan. But I think that the things he did in Europe were generally speaking positive. It's interesting to me how passionate you are about Korea, because South Korea did become a very viable US ally. It's one of the greatest economic growth stories of the past 100 years. And that was all an outcome of US sticking up for it. Now, in the grand scheme of things, was it worth it? I see your point. I see your point. I mean, there was literally a war. But remember one thing. The Russians were not going to go to nuclear war over Korea. And the Chinese couldn't. And so I do think this is one of those situations where you have a US president with a plethora and preponderance of power, basically choosing to use it. To your point, it wasn't, you're arguing it wasn't necessary. But I think the outcomes seem like it was at least worth it, because you have an ardent US ally in the East Asian theater.
Japan was not enough? Like, we have everything we needed with Japan. And it's really two things from here. If the Truman administration had said, and this was Dean Acheson's speech at the press club, where what gives us away and defines Korea outside of U.S. security interest. If the U.S. had said, no, the Korean Peninsula is part of the U.S. security umbrella and we will defend it, and then the Soviets tripped it, like, okay, at least you've laid down a red line, and when they tripped the red line, you said, okay, like, now we're going to come do it. But that wasn't what happened. Dean Acheson left Korea outside of the U.S. security perimeter, and the Soviets were like, cool, we're going to get our North Korean friends, much to China's chagrin, Mao hated this, to go across and take the southern part, because we're going to mop it up, because the U.S. doesn't want it. And then, because he's worried about seeming weak, because he's worried about China going after Taiwan, all these other ancillary things, suddenly Truman gets his panties in a wad and says, no, we have to defend South Korea. And 3 million people die so that the Korean Peninsula can remain divided. I'm sorry, like, I'm more callous and heartless than you are sometimes about, the death tolls and the human suffering that is associated with geopolitics sometimes. That's 3 million deaths that didn't have to happen because of Truman's vanity. Like, I lay that directly at his feet.
Well,
and then there's the whole constitutional legal arguments and everything else.
On the other hand, like, in your world, Pyongyang is now running all of Korea.
Or Seoul, or you help Seoul take over Pyongyang, or you, like, include them in the security umbrella and say, no, like, this is going to be a defined interest for us, and we're not going to stand for.
Right. Okay. I respect that. You're arguing the ambiguity was stupid. Okay. Fair. Yeah.
And then just to round up my list, James Madison. I won't spend too long on him. I'll actually quote a gentleman from CFR named James Lindsay, who I thought summed it up well.
Very, very well.
Oh, great. Well, I love
you, Jay. He was my boss for a short period of time at the LBJ School of Public Affairs. So yes, go ahead.
Well, great. Well, I'll quote him. When you ask Congress to declare war and the result is that your national capital is sacked and you have to flee the White House with the china and the silverware, you should at least be mentioned in the conversation about least successful foreign policy presidents. So James Madison, number 4 on my list. And number 5 on my list, and surprised you didn't go this direction, but maybe, I don't know. For me, it's Bill Clinton. And this goes back to our degree of difficulty.
He's on my Bill Clinton, dishonorable mentions, but yes.
Dishonorable mention? He had the lowest degree of difficulty of any U.S. president. Because to your point, George H.W. paved the way. Like, all he had to do was be like the good president of a unipolar hegemon. And instead, he spent his time fooling around with interns in the White House, Black Hawk Down, what happened with Serbia, jihadists rising. He doesn't give a crap. He wastes time with the Israelis and the Palestinians. Nothing ends up happening. I mean, the Rwandan genocide does nothing about that. I mean, you go down the list, like, just a murderer's row of stupid mistakes that didn't have to be there because he was distracted, because he was lazy, because he wasn't thinking about it. I don't know. Like, just a basically competent person with foreign policy could have done so much with that period, and instead, Bill Clinton just fumbled it. So he's on my list. I think he's much worse than Joe Biden. There you go.
I decided to, recluse myself from Bill Clinton, since he did bomb my homeland effectively because he was messing with an intern. But let's just leave that aside. I think that, yes, I think it's tough. It's tough because you are the hegemon. You have everything before you. It's a full buffet, right? No one's there to tell you not to eat, the oysters with the steak. No one's there to tell you like, hey, pump the brakes a little bit, and yeah, I mean, it got to America's head. Like, he really started normative, value-laden foreign policy, and he allowed people to sucker him into that. In particular, I would say that after the Rwanda genocide, the whole like responsibility to protect, the Samantha Powers of the world, it was just like, we can't let this happen again. And then effectively every time there was a civil war somewhere, and somebody decided that was the next Hitler. Meanwhile, the United States of America shut its eyes to many other forms of human rights violations that were happening many other places. So when a NATO ally, Turkey, did it to the Kurds, nobody said anything. When pariah state like Serbia did it to Albanians in Kosovo, that was a big deal. And so, yes, it was this hypocritical, non-objective application of responsibility to protect that opened the door to its use later on. And I always remember, I'm very proud of an 18-year-old Marko arguing against the NATO attack on Serbia, because my argument was, well, yes, we argue that this is being done for the sake of human rights. But who's to say that Russia or China won't one day say that somebody else had violated their responsibility to protect? And of course, Sergei Lavrov, with a Cheshire cat smile on his face, used precisely that to justify the invasion of Georgia in 2008.
Well, and I don't really buy the Mearsheimer line. I think it's overly simplistic. But if you buy the Mearsheimer, hey, we intimidated the Russians because we made promises about NATO and not expansion, like that's also all under Clinton. Like there was a real opportunity. Like that was probably the only true opportunity for a reset in U.S.-Russia relations. Yes. I'm not convinced it was possible, but like if it was possible, that was the moment, and Clinton wasn't there.
To defend Clinton, it's really tough when you are the top dog and you're the hegemon, and people are lining up for 3 days to get a bite of a cheeseburger at a McDonald's that just opened in Amman, Jordan. As I witnessed, because I was a 12-year-old living in Amman, people like Bedouin came from a desert and pitched tents so they could taste an American cheeseburger. Like that shit gets to your head, Jacob. And that's why I don't have Bill Clinton in my losing five or even in the honorable mentions, because I just don't know if there's any human being, would you? Would I? With that preponderance of power, what will we
But
have
George
done?
H.W., do you think George H.W. would?
He was, I think George H.W. and his advisors were deathly afraid of their situation, to be honest with you, Jacob. And I think it's very difficult for us to put ourselves in their shoes, because in retrospect, America just crushed it in those 4 years. Saddam and his million-man army, the collapse of the Soviet Union, reunification, everything seems obvious. But to them, when you read their memos, when you read the op-eds of the time, there was an incredible amount of fear. Most political scientists in the early 90s thought we were in a multipolar world. They did not see the hegemony at all. It was Bill Clinton who actually got hegemony of America on his silver platter. And I just think that, blaming him for like hypocritically applying humanitarian interventions is just, it was going to happen. And yes, he bombed my homeland. I think in his shoes, I would have probably done the same thing to somebody's homeland. To be honest with you, I just think it's really difficult. Now, speaking of like the context, I think we got to give him the benefit of just understanding that it was an incredible moment to be American. America won. It's like the Matrix movie. What does Agent Smith say? 1999 was peak human civilization. That's what Bill Clinton got. And so, of course, he did whatever he wanted, whether it was in the Oval Office or outside of it.
And my honorable mentions are just, you had Andrew Johnson. He's in my honorable mention just because of how badly he bungled Reconstruction. I give Alaska to Seward, not to him. And then
that's fair.
It's funny. And then and James Buchanan, because James Buchanan, while the Republic is literally falling apart at the seams, he's like, okay, I'm going to go conquer more of South America and Central America. And it's like, dude, you've got some issues brewing at home. You might want to look a little bit closer to home before you start worrying about that.
Absolutely. That's a really good one. I feel bad I don't have Buchanan in my, he was in my honorable mention. Okay, so the two guys that I have Eisenhower.
And Carter, right? You said?
No, JFK. No,
oh,
Carter,
JFK.
Carter's on my honorable dismentions or dishonorable mentions. Everybody knows Carter kind of fucked up. Like, we can leave that aside. He did continue the policy that Nixon had implemented with China. I don't think Carter gets any benefit for the China part of it. So,
Yeah.
But Eisenhower is on my list. I think that the domino theory really starts with him. Although I think you would argue, I mean, you have Henry Truman on your list because he did not clearly delineate where American spheres of influence started and ended. And that's fair. I think that's a very big mistake.
Yeah, it has nothing to do with domino theory at all. It has to do with 3 million people died for his vanity, in my point of view. I think you're right about Eisenhower doing the domino thing, even though that's not what Kennan was really pushing for. And then also to your point about the military-industrial complex, I mean, unleashing the CIA, not just on Iran, but the world,
Guatemala,
that's under Eisenhower's watch. Like, that's how it all begins. Like, that's definitely there for him.
Exactly. Like, he unleashes this military intelligence complex, which I think is maybe a more appropriate way to put it, which, right-wing conservatives today who are Trump fans would call the deep state, which I think is unfair given where that term comes from. But with Eisenhower, I think this is a problem, right? And he understands what he did at the end, and he repents because I think he understood just how huge of a blunder he created. He wanted to be remembered in history as the guy who called this out. Well, too bad, buddy. You've been in charge for a very long time. Military coup in Iran. I mean, honestly, if you think about the state of the Middle East today, the genesis of all of that is not letting socialists take over Iran. Like, bro, free healthcare, it's okay, Eisenhower, Dwight. Let the people have some fucking free healthcare, man. Like, relax. Instead, what do we get? What we got was a decades of supporting Shah regime, which was repressive and run by an idiot, that then leads to, of course, the Islamic State and a republic, which leads to Saudi Arabia becoming extremely alarmed by the fact that there's a theocracy across the Gulf. And so they themselves triple down on conservative Islam. This all starts because United States of America wasn't comfortable with a democratic socialist running around. But apparently in 2025, we're comfortable with a democratic socialist running New York City. Well, so that's
and it's not just that. I mean, like, it's also the CIA, what they did in Guatemala in '54, what they did in Congo around Patrice Lumumba. If you want to locate the beginning of Vietnam, it's Eisenhower who deploys the first military advisors to Vietnam. Like, a lot of it starts with him.
But you know why I don't have that, Jacob? Because fine, boys will be boys. You want to tinker with Guatemala? I'm not going to eat your lunch for that. But Iran was a really critical piece of the puzzle, and this idea. The problem with Eisenhower is that he adopts a military objective, non-nuanced lens to something that's extremely nuanced. Foreign policy is nuanced. And you cannot say that communism in North Korea is equivalent to a socialist guy in Tehran. Right? And not engaging center-left policymakers around the world, to your point later about, Allende and so on, not engaging center-left policymakers is a mistake. And I think that's a mistake that, for example, Donald Trump doesn't seem to be making. We'll see what happens with Maduro, but it seems like Donald Trump may very well have a deal waiting with Venezuela, regardless of whether the guy's left or right. And I think that's the issue. I think Eisenhower just couldn't see beyond communism, right? Like, everyone who's left of center is a slippery slope towards communism and therefore will engage the domino theory. And that was clearly a mistake. And I think cost the US a lot. So that's why he's on my list. Now, JFK.
Well, yeah,
oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I just want to say, I think also like Congo is not one to overlook. Like we can say that Guatemala was small and probably things would have happened anyway. But I mean, I've done a little bit of reading about Eisenhower and ordering the assassination of Lumumba and everything else. And if you think about, I mean, we already mentioned the Rwandan genocide. Like maybe all these things would have happened in some kind of sordid way anyway. But for that exact same reason, for this irrational, I don't know, irrational is the wrong word, but like this over-indexing on communism and letting Dulles and all these other guys run around, sort of like he's the top general and he's just lets these guys in the field do whatever they want to do. Like he also really screwed up Central Africa in ways that he didn't need to for the long haul. So yeah, I'm with you there.
Okay, JFK. Bay of Pigs was a disaster.
Yes,
and
absolutely was.
And then the 13 days, like, so I would flip the script on the Cuban Missile Crisis and say that, I mean, you know, everybody loves the winner. Everybody loves the guy who goes all in on the poker table. But, like, thank God for Nikita Khrushchev. You know what I mean? Like, that's all I'm going to say. Like, that was a very ballsy move, but it did almost lead to World War III. And I think that you cannot talk about the Cuban Missile Crisis without talking about the Bay of Pigs.
Yeah. Or Vietnam. I mean, Vietnam, like Eisenhower starts it and Kennedy doubles down. Yep. And the biographers who want to look at Kennedy through rose-tinted glasses say that he learned in those first 2 years and he was going to pull back. And Johnson wanted to do the opposite. But, our buddy LBJ here, like he got led down the garden path by the Knights of Camelot. Like they were the ones that authored all these policies and they thought they were so smart. And in the end, David Halberstam's book, The Best and the Brightest, is worth the time reading for anybody who wants to think about not just JFK himself, but like the culture, the foreign policy culture that he created, the technocratic hubris. Like it's the democratic version, but it's just as potent as the Dulles thing that we're criticizing with Eisenhower.
No, absolutely. And I think that, I think we don't remember JFK as an ardently anti-communist leader because in the domestic context, he comes off as left-leaning and liberal and progressive. But the truth is that he was an ardent anti-communist and effectively, probably deepened the Cold War a lot more than a lot of people think. So,
well, and the truth is that none of his quote unquote progressive things would have been passed without my friend right here, Lyndon. Lyndon is the one who takes the progressive agenda, which languished for the first, for as long as Kennedy was in office, and he shoves it down Congress's throat because he knows where all the bodies are buried and he can muscle around the Southern Dems and everything else. Kennedy couldn't do any of that. I think the one defense you can give Kennedy is that before he was, and we'll never know, it's one of those historical hypotheticals because he's cut down too early. He did show the propensity to learn from his mistakes. He was showing signals that he understood how badly he had messed up. He thought it was too easy. He thought he was just going to wave around his smart guys and everything was going to be fine. And you can see before he gets assassinated, he's starting to make changes and he's starting to talk more about détente with the Soviets and maybe it's not such a good idea to be in Vietnam. I don't know that I trust these people that I put around me. So like maybe history would have been different because he would have started to learn from his mistakes, but we only have the record that he had while he was in office. And while he had the totem, or while he had the driver's seat, like he just authored a lot of stupid things that were needlessly risky and set up his vice president who took over for him in a really bad situation. So
he was learning, and that's why they killed him. Just kidding.
Is that why they killed him? Oh God,
that's a joke.
Oh God,
I don't fucking know. No. That was not. No.
Have you? I heard this joke recently that a guy passes away. And he goes up to the pearly gates and he's before the chair of the Holy One. And Holy One asks, is there anything you want to know before I give you admittance into the gates of heaven? And the guy asked, I just really want to know who killed John F. Kennedy. And God looks at him and says, well, Lee Harvey Oswald, single shooter. And the guy, as he's walking through the gate, says, God, this goes higher up than I thought. But
oh, man. Yeah, that's right. Conspiracy theories, man, they never die. All right, cool. So that's good. Not a lot of disagreement. I mean, a little bit on Truman.
No, we have some disagreement. I disagreed with you on Obama. I disagreed with you on Biden. We had some differences.
Wait, time up. So let's talk
Yeah,
Biden.
fine. Let's talk about him.
I think we should close this with the Joe Biden verdict. I mean, why is it that you don't think? Oh, I mean, he's not on your dishonorable mentions.
No, he was middling for me. Like he's not great. He wasn't terrible. Like he made some obvious mistakes. He's like the last gasp of neoconservatism. Like I can't believe that he brought that failed policy back. I think you're right. I think he doubled down on great power competition with China, which was ultimately going to be unproductive. Afghanistan, he's the one who had the balls to get out. So I don't really.
Yeah,
I totally see that he
no. I
did it
agree
in a
with you on
bad
that.
way, but it was politically disruptive for.
Listen.
Yeah,
The reason
he was the one who ended the forever wars. All of you folks who like think that it was Trump, like it was Biden who took the flack to do it. Like,
well, the reason I don't give him credit for it is the same reason I don't give him flack for it, which is that if Donald Trump had been the president, if he had won the election in 2020, we would have had the exact same outcome in Afghanistan because it was his policy. So, it is what it is. To me, there's two really, really critical reasons why I have Joe Biden here. The first and foremost is not defining what victory in Ukraine looks like.
mm-hmm.
And we're still paying for that. This notion that Ukraine must win, which is a mantra repeated by the Joe Biden acolytes in Washington, D.C. Like you would go to a CFR talk in D.C. or you would go to any event in Washington, D.C., and they would breathlessly repeat it, just like God bless United States of America and God bless our troops. It was Ukraine must win. That was the end of every breathless speech by a Joe Biden administration official. It's like, okay, but what does that mean? Because I can tell you that there's no chance in hell that Ukraine will win those territories back. So is the intention of the United States of America to pursue a conflict that will eventually drain Ukraine of its blood and its people because you clearly are not sending them any troops? So what does that mean? And then, of course, Nord Stream, which I think has massively disrupted U.S.-European alliance. You're destroying a piece of infrastructure that the Germans paid for. And, you can talk about Trump and his behavior and how he has led to a loss of confidence between Europe and the U.S. That started under Biden. And then finally, I would say the start of the conflict in Ukraine, we forget that it was the United States of America that encouraged Zelensky and Kiev to abandon the European negotiated peace deal with Russia, which was unfair to Ukraine. I completely objectively agree. The Minsk protocols and the Minsk agreements definitely were not good for Ukraine. They effectively gave the pro-Russian rebels a veto over future Ukrainian economic and NATO integration. I agree with this. But there was a reason that Germany and France negotiated those with Russia, because they don't care. They care about their own interests. And so Joe Biden shows up and says to Zelensky right off the bat, you don't have to abide by any of these agreements that ended the war from 2014 to 2015. So I disagree with John Mersheimer. I disagree with him that Russia invaded Ukraine because of NATO expansion. But the reason Russia did invade Ukraine is because it saw an America that was supporting a much more aggressive Kiev, unlike the pre-Zelensky administration of Poroshenko, which did sit down and did negotiate the Minsk protocols because the Germans and the French were like, look, we're not going to have a land war in Europe. You're going to have to give the Russians something. And then America shows up and it's like, nah, we're the hegemon. Ukraine must win. Let's go. So I do think you can blame Joe Biden for the start of the war in Ukraine. And when Donald Trump says this will never happen under my watch, I actually think he's right.
Well, I think that's a little far. But I disagree with you on this. I think Putin lost it a little bit and made a mistake. And as we talked about in our leadership ranking,
I don't disagree with
he was brilliant for decades, and he made one mistake, and he's in such a weak position that he makes one mistake, and it all comes falling down. But Biden, I mean what I say when he's the last gasp of the neoconservatives. His biggest mistake, and he had some successes. There's pulling out of Afghanistan. There's putting the Japan-South Korea relationship back together. He never gets credit for that. That was something that he did that was good. Reinforcing normalizing U.S. relationships with European allies. But I think the thing that he really missed was he, like so many in his party and so many leaders around the world, convinced themselves that the first Trump administration was just a fever dream.
Yeah.
That it was some kind of aberration, and that it was his job to return things to the way that they were before.
That's it.
And set things back. And what he really had was he had a 4-year period where if he had been thinking not of his legacy and not of a second term or not of spreading U.S. ideals around the world by having Ukraine stand up to Russia or insulting Mohammed bin Salman or any of the other things. If he had just thought about, I have 4 years to prepare the world for multipolar America and to reinforce relationships with the countries that is going to be really important to reinforce them with, so that when somebody like Donald or Donald comes back, they can't just break things. Like, I spend these next 4 years building fences around the things that I think are important for the United States going forward. Like, he had a tremendous opportunity there. And instead, he chose to believe that, to your point, it was the 1990s, which in his head, Marko, it might have been the 1990s. Like, but maybe he's the Woodrow Wilson of the 21st century. He had just lost it, you know?
First of all, preach on everything you just said. Absolutely correct. But I want to say one more thing. The one thing, so Joe Biden, Blinken, Sullivan, they walk into the White House and they effectively say everything that Donald Trump touched is soiled. We're going to do the opposite.
Except tariffs on China.
Except tariffs on China. No, more broadly than that, except the broad economic assault on China that does not open any negotiations. So my biggest problem with the Joe Biden administration is that they come in, they do that idiotic summit in Alaska with China, and then they effectively don't communicate with China at all in a reasonable way. There were meetings, there were working groups, but for the most part, all you see during the Biden administration is the ratcheting of tensions. Now, Jake Sullivan comes out with his small garden, high walls strategy. No, we're just going to focus on high tech. But that's not what the Chinese see on the other side. They see effectively a U.S. administration that doesn't have the political room to maneuver domestically because they're afraid of being accused of being soft in China. Very similar to your problem with Truman.
Yes, it's the Democrats' biggest issue. They are worried about being soft on China. So it's why we go into Korea. It's why we go into Vietnam.
Exactly.
It's like the Democrats don't want to be soft on China because FDR thought he lost China because he thought he supported we talked a lot about FDR earlier, like his whole thing with Mao and Chiang Kai-shek. Like that's a dark mark on his record.
But I don't think it's a Democratic concern with being soft in China. I think it's the Democrats always have a problem. You know, and it's unfair, and I feel bad. They have an albatross around their back, which is that they're seen as a party of peace and doves. So it's not just China, Jacob. It's like, it's difficult for the Democrats to make a deal with any enemy. And so Donald Trump flies up into the air in an airplane. That airplane is called being tough on China. And then midway, we changed up pilots, and Joe Biden's like, well, I can't land this plane, because if I do, I'm going to be accused of being soft. And so he keeps flying that plane with no direction, with no sense of what are we trying to get? What are we extracting from China? What's the purpose of American, assertiveness here? What is it that we're trying to change in China's behavior? And so instead, it just leads China and the U.S. on a path that if Kamala Harris had gotten elected, I fear could have gotten really bad. I don't think that Harris had any plan to negotiate with China on anything, because that was just not acceptable politically. And so the reason I have Joe Biden as the worst president of foreign policy is because his team and himself, they live in a social media age. They live in an age where foreign policy has never been as democratically discussed domestically as in the past. And they were so susceptible to those pressures. They not once stood on an objective, realist, pragmatic principle and said, you know what? Ukraine should win, but maybe we need to talk with Russia about where their sphere of influence starts and where it ends. And yes, China's a rival, but let's create a framework where we can not go to World War III. And so that's my biggest problem. And I think that, hopefully we won't be going back to that foreign policy, because in a multipolar world, it's very dangerous to be normatively and morally based. And so that's why he's my number one.
Yeah. I agree with a lot of what you said. I just wouldn't put him worse. And the things you're talking about, it's that's George W. Like it's just the last gasp of George W.
Yes, but you know what the difference is? And this is why I have him ahead of George W. You're right. It is. The difference is that George W. Bush inherited that preponderance of power. Not to excuse him, but if you're going to bundle American foreign policy using moralistic and value-laden, I would rather you do that when America is unipolar than multipolar. Now, you can argue George W. Bush ushered in a multipolar world because he wasted so many of Americans' resources. And that's where, he is number 2 in my book. But Joe Biden misjudged the world he's in. George W. Bush's error is that he wasted American unipolarity. Joe Biden's problem is that he thought he was still running a unipolar world, and so almost started World War III as a result of his actions.
Yeah.
But anyways, doesn't matter.
Well,
this was a lot of fun. I do not consider myself an expert in U.S. presidents. I think that you are much more knowledgeable in this, and I really appreciate all the cool little quotes and tidbits from history that you brought. I just happen to have a bizarre fetish for Polk.
To close it out, and you are an expert on geopolitics, which means the foreign policy aspects of this, I think you have forgotten more than most people listening to this podcast will know about it, even if you don't know the inside baseball. But just to round it out, on our Presidential Historian Survey 2021, their worst 5, and there's a name on this list that makes me think that they're not being particularly objective. James Buchanan, the worst. They have Donald J. Trump as the second worst, and that's Trump. That is Trump derangement syndrome. Like maybe history will put him there at the. I don't know, but it's way too early to say that. And he is certainly not worse than Andrew Johnson. William Henry Harrison was only alive for a week, so I don't. He's like 4th worst. Franklin Pierce, Lyndon B. Johnson, George W. Bush, and then you start getting into names that I know nothing about: Millard Fillmore, James Garfield, John Tyler, all the way up the list. And smack dab in the middle, just if you want to know who's in the middle of this list, there's Andrew Jackson, Grover Cleveland, Gerald Ford, all guys that we didn't even really talk about. Jimmy Carter's there, but we can talk about Jimmy Carter.
It's interesting. Carter, Ford, we didn't really mention them. Ford wasn't even running foreign policy. It was really Kissinger at the time. So,
and Carter, I think Carter gets a bad rap. A lot gets laid at his feet, but I think he had really tough circumstances, and I think it was just kind of bad luck. He was sandwiched between these two eras, and I don't think he ever really had a shot.
And also, what do we really shit on Carter for? I mean, for trying to free the hostages in Iran, what?
Yeah, he gets blamed for he gets blamed for that, and he doesn't get the credit for what he did in negotiating peace deals in the Middle East between the Arab countries and Israel, and furthering Nixon's policy on China, everything else. I mean, the
China thing is the part that is really a problem for me. You are laying on Carter's feet a failure of a military operation. I think that's unfair. I mean, George H.W. Bush, I gave him credit for Schwarzkopf's famous left hook and stuff in Desert War I, which is also not fair, but at least he had the balls to face off against Saddam. Right?
Yeah.
And I mean, ultimately, it's not Carter's. Carter had the balls to initiate that operation.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's also, we were talking about best and worst. There's also, you could just be mediocre. He was just average. He was a mediocre guy at a time that required maybe somebody of higher capacity. And he was fine. He was just middling, not compared to some of these other people we talked about. So, all right. That was fun, cousin. Next time we'll have to do top 5, bottom 5 of Serbian leaders so that you can have the up on me.
I think that's yeah. I don't think I would have the up on you on that one. To be honest with you, I'm not that steeped in Serbian history, but I do think that next time what we can do is we can try to match each of our presidents with their basketball avatar. And then we will lose literally everyone listening to this podcast.
Yeah, let's wait until we get to the 1 million viewer mark, and then we can start doing that shit.
We can do that. All right. That's what actually, after Christmas break in January, New Year's break and all that, after the holidays, we are going to do the movies.
Yep. Absolutely. All right, cousin, I'll see you next week. Listeners, we hope you enjoy this. Spread the gospel. Thank you.